What's up, y'all? Welcome back to the Onyx Report, Black Masculinist news for the day. Hope you are well. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, join, and donate. Support the channel so we can continue to bring you content. We're getting back on our grind to our daily reporting. So appreciate the support. Hope everybody is doing as well as possible. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about something that happened in the comment sections in one of my videos. Last week, I did a review of the film Love and Basketball. And then I posted it separately from the video I initially did it in, which was a live. And I did a black masculinist interpretation of the film, focusing on the three men of the film that I thought were worthy of reflection. There were two fathers of the film. If you're not familiar, Love and Basketball is a love story starring Omar Epps and Sanaa Lathan. The two fathers of both of those characters, and of course, Omar Epps' character, Quincy. And I talked about how those characters can be viewed from a black male standpoint. How it's seen, what's left out. And for the most part, this is a film, directed by a woman, starring a woman. So, it's of course a film for women. And this tends to be one that women have commented on quite a bit over the last couple of decades since it came out. I want to say it came out in 2000. So, about 21 years ago. And it was an enjoyable film. I remember taking my wife to the theater to see it when it was out. But seeing it again, decades later, from where I stand now, there were all kinds of problems with it. But that's not what this is about. One of the comments I got in response to my interpretation was how I was being unfair. I was critiquing the women too harshly. And although this person, who was presumably a black woman, at least that's the way she presented herself, agreed with some of the things I said, not all. She took particular umbrage when I pointed out that these women were all entitled in the film. The two mothers of the characters, as well as Sanaa Lathan's character, Monica, pointed out that I thought all three of those women were entitled. All of them lived in a fairly posh suburb, right, where their men were 1% men. Right, basketball playing father was an NBA player, 1% man. Monica's father in the film was a banker, living in a posh suburb, multi-story house that he put his family in. 1% man. And it doesn't take as much as it does in other communities for a man to be 1% in the black community. You make over 150 years, 50 a year, you're already in the 2% for the black community. So for these women to be either married to or the daughter of these 1% men, I thought they were already fairly entitled. And the kinds of problems they had with their men were in many ways exaggerated and overblown. But go back to the critique if you want to hear more about that. But she took issue with it and she said, well, I think you're being a little harsh. We need to be balanced. That was the interesting thing to me. She said, we need to be more balanced. And I had two thoughts. First, I ain't seen no balance when it came to interpreting these kind of films until men started pushing back. And you can take it all the way back to The Color Purple and forward. There was no balance. Nobody called for balance when there was a distorted portrayal, which was a betrayal, of black men and their representation in media. There was no balance, no calls for balance. But as soon as black men start pushing back, there's a request for balance. And the second thought I had was I started to notice as I came into really doing this work on black men, even in my intimate relationships, when I would start to voice my opinion about different things, at first it was met with hostility. It was met with argument because it was going so against the grain of what we were familiar with. You know what I mean? When it comes to these kinds of media presentations, black men are often monsters or inconsiderate jerks or abusers or whatever. And we're supposed to accept that. But it's only been in the last decade or so where you started to see more and more men responding with critical analyses, with data, with pointed arguments in ways that really haven't been happening in the last 30 to 40 years. And so there are many women who've been socialized into this narrative where they can do no wrong, and men are to bear the brunt of criticism who do not take kindly to the response from men, right? So the first response is hostility, right? And when you start to hit them with facts, when you start to hit them with accurate presentations or arguments, I should say, and, in response to how these men are being portrayed, one of the first things I started to notice, the more accurate my information got, because, early on, 8 or 9 years ago, it wasn't easy to figure these things out because we've all been conditioned into accepting, the Black community most particularly, into accepting a one-way aggression toward Black men and an accepted position of being lesser beings of sorts than Black women, right? It's one of the things we've kind of come to do. So it wasn't easy to kind of come to these conclusions because so few people were saying it out loud. You wondered if you were missing something. You wondered if you were crazy because no one else was saying it. But as I got to be more confident, more sure-footed about the things I was saying, I noticed that beyond the hostility as the first response, what I started to hear more from women after that was, well, we got to be balanced. So I'm going to read to you my response. And the conversation continued after what I'm about to read. So you can go into the comment section and look at it yourself, the Love and Basketball video. But for right now, I'm going to go into what my immediate response was when she said I was being unfair for the women in the film and that I needed to be more balanced. She kept talking about both sides, right? So let me bring this over so I can read it right here. So she said, get rid of this. All right. Yeah. So my response to her was, both sides, huh? I said, I've been an avid fan of this movie until recently for 20 plus years. I have never heard anyone focus on the women's contributions to the dysfunction in this film's story. Not once. Right? All of the emphasis has been on the men, from ironing shirts to cheating on women. But I've not heard anyone focus on this from the men's perspective. My problem, and this happens a lot, is when we do start speaking to men's experiences, people are quick to jump on both sides while low-key trying to absolve the women of holding their contributions. I just put this video out, and while the men are grappling with how much we've not learned to advocate for ourselves and voice our perspectives, we're urged to make it about both groups. Nah. After 20 years, I think the entitled women in this story deserve to hold on to some critique for more than a week or so before we make it an everybody's at fault thing. Now, believe it or not, this is bigger than just a film, because what I've been seeing has been happening in a lot of different contexts on a lot of different issues. I don't care if we're talking about the perception of Black men in regard to employment, income, family production, having kids, incarceration, doesn't matter. Whatever it is, there's a dominant narrative about Black male inferiority and substandard behavior that haunts Black men regardless of whether or not you have a doctorate. You're still associated with a very, negative portrayal of Black masculinity. And when you start to push back against it, the immediate response is often, well, we got to look at it from both sides. We got to be balanced. No, what that means is it means you're right. Haven't considered that, but I don't want to hold the L. I don't want to hold being wrong. You have to be wrong as Black men. And if you can't be solely wrong, then let's find a way to make it equal on both sides so that I don't really have to deal with the repercussions of what I've supported. That's what that really means. Now, it's not to say that we can't actually get to a point where we can fully acknowledge as part of the human experience that everybody brings something to the table that's problematic from time to time. There's got to be a place and time for that, I agree. But it ain't going to be 30 seconds after you hear what Black men haven't said for 40 years. Story doesn't get to change because you're uncomfortable with the critique. Black men have had to sit with this critique for generations. And you got people that can't handle 30 seconds of it, especially once they figure out that you're right. They run from it and find a way to deflect. Now, here's the key part to it too. Even though there's this language of both sides, right? One of the quickest things that happens is that there's a low-key attempt in defining what both sides taking on ownership of whatever the issue is. There's a low-key last-minute addition that many women make in these arguments, whether they're, public debates or whether they're private conversations between couples. It is a low-key way of trying to really absolve the women of their contribution to the situation by explaining away how they feel or what happened to them and, trying to make the men more responsible than the women, right? So this is the reason I blast back at these both sides arguments. It's not genuine. It's not genuine. You haven't actually, many haven't actually had to sit with these critiques and take them in. So I'm using Love and Basketball as an example, but if you haven't had to sit with the critique of the women characters in that, or many other different films and representations, then you don't get to shout back both sides and then low-key deflect to make men more responsible, because it means you haven't actually dealt with, internalized, and come to grips with how the misrepresentation of Black men has played into how we've been socialized, how we see each other, what we expect from one another, and all kinds of dynamics. Family, friends, lovers, husbands and wives, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Whatever the gender roles, whatever the familial relations, or whatever the social relationships are, as long as Black men have been portrayed falsely and problematically. When people give way too quickly in a debate and try to jump to this all sides thing, this both sides, everybody has to have ownership, be very mindful of the way they immediately try to offset that ownership, right? And reset the narrative of Black male, Black males as the primary problems in the situation, while at the same time trying to absolve Black women and girls of their roles. And this is happening beyond the Black community, of course, but I'm talking to the Black community. But in the West, these are the gender dynamics that we have to deal with. And there's a time when both sides is not genuine in the argument. And like I said, we can get to that, but you got to earn it by at least being able, or she has to earn it, I should say, by at least owning the dynamic before you dismiss it. So fellas, keep applying the information, keep applying the arguments that liberate and, exonerate Black men from an image that has been in many ways thrust upon them. And what do I mean by that? Everybody commits errors. Everybody commits faults. There is negative behavior from every single group. But what behavior becomes the dominant narrative about that group is a whole different conversation. And who gets to determine that is a whole different conversation. And when it's based on an attempt to market ideas to women, because women now have disposable income, then that's not an honest portrayal of Black male behavior. That's a market decision. And marketing decisions should not be determining in families how whole groups of men are perceived just because it's financially lucrative to make films that do this. Push back, fellas, and don't accept, quick, deflective attempts to jump into both sides when she has not fully accepted the ways in which these narrative practices have benefited Black women, girls, at the expense of the image of Black males. All right? Peace.